And good morning, everybody. This is our weekly roundtable at the Dutch Mentor, where we are covering one topic per week. This week, the theme has been around team engagement or employee engagement. And it's certainly a topic of interest in myself for the simple fact that I believe that an engaged employee is more productive. If you're more productive, you make fewer mistakes. You actually will generate more revenue and cost less. So there's a lot of in that for the leader of the organization to understand not only the importance but also the time that needs to be invested in this area. So I have two folks on the line right now. Greg Pekera, retired police sergeant, NYPD, a leader of a squad in a more regimented military, quasi-military style, but certainly engagement there is relevant. And I also have James Bannon on, who was a facilitator for New York City Health and Hospitals, and focus a lot around nursing engagement. So I think both of you can bring very unique perspectives to the table on what engagement is and how it applied into your particular industry. And that might just be a way for all of us to learn and relate and make improvements along the way. So Greg, I'll start with you since you're on the middle of my screen. Give me a perspective at NYPD. What is team engagement? What did that look like? And did they actually pay attention to that?
Well, obviously in the NYPD, it's a paramilitary type organization. So obviously quite a bit different than the private sector. And, this is my first foray into the private world after retiring about 10 months ago. But, so engagement is a little bit different. I can force engagement, I guess, in a paramilitary kind of situation. But my last 7 or 8 years in the department, I was in the more investigative world in the detective bureau. And so not so much in the streets, barking orders or having things like that done. You have to, you have a lot of personalities that you start to deal with. I had a larger squad of detectives who were responsible for, self-motivating cases and cultivating their own informants and things like that, and bringing that stuff to the supervisors to generate casework. So I think one of the first things I remember once I got into that investigative world where you're dealing with a whole office full of 15 or 20 detectives is the first thing that pops into my mind is just a lot of face time. I think there's always going to be 1 or 2 or 3 people that are easy to get engaged. They're very self-motivated. They're always running around. They have the best informants, the best casework, things like that. And you can sometimes, I think, kind of get lulled into dealing with a lot of those people. They're easier. They get things done. They're productive. They do what you ask when you ask them to do it. But some of the other people, some of the slower starters are the ones that I think you have to have a lot more face time with. You have to bring them into the office, talk about what they have going on and let them know that you are kind of, on them, monitoring what they're doing, and they're not getting lost in the shuffle. And I think that's probably the same between private and the public sector. That's just the one thing that popped up into my mind immediately as you mentioned engagement.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. No matter what organization you go into, people fit on the bell curve. You have early adopters that will follow along and will always be there for you. As leaders, we tend to lean on them a lot because it is easier. Because when we ask them once and they either already have done it or they will get right on top of that. You have that reluctant group in the middle that either are with you all the time or quickly adopt when they see people take the lead. And on the backside of the curve, you have those people who are either late adopters or even those people who are referred to as saboteurs, who can really bring the whole group down. Management engaging each one of them needs to be done on an individual level and needs to be done, in a way that you need to understand why they are in the position they are, and then from the why, really understand the what and the how. And converting those saboteurs into contributors is not easy to do. And there is a decision matrix to be made, both in the world of the paramilitary style, where it is more directive rather than incentive driven or through context driven. It is still, there's a responsibility, right? There's accountability. As a leader, you have the responsibility to actually follow through. And we see a lot of disengagement take place when people are not following through or not holding people accountable equally. And so, James, shifting over to you in the hospital world, when we talk about accountability and we talk about distractors of engagement, what has been your experience and your learnings as a facilitator, specifically working with nursing? And what are some of these distractors from engagement that actually hurt the larger team?
Okay, so yes, as we had mentioned before we got started with this, Walter, you and I worked together concurrently in the same environment, so we understood a lot of the same principles. And what came to mind first for me was the ebb and flow of the demands of the patient load and the different types of cases that were coming through the hospital at any given time was not that predictable. And staffing levels, although nurses were the greatest numbers, the staffing numbers were relatively low at that time. So the challenge was to balance the staff availability with the demands at any given time in the day or the week as to what was going on. So if you had a greater demand, some of the same nurses who were working their regular shifts might be called upon to work additional shifts, which definitely had an effect on their ability to maintain the quality level of their engagement with, with their duties. And sometimes, we had to look at it, how to balance that in the best possible way. And on an individual basis, some people are better suited to meeting those demands under those conditions than others might be. So it's very similar to what I heard you say, Greg, is that, sometimes you have to look at it on an individual basis and engage with people as you go along and kind of look at what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. And to realize that maybe you're making too great a demand on certain individuals or on anyone at any given time. So it all comes back to that's the accountability that I saw on the part of both the individuals doing the work and those that manage them.
Yeah, so I think that the measure that we both can talk about is on both sides of the equation is really productivity, right? It is that
right.
When people feel stressed or they feel overloaded, the easy thing to do is I need more team members, right? I need more. Other times it's is a good way to problem solve is like, am I doing the right jobs, right? Is that who is doing the job and who's not? Are we equally doing the job across the board? And am I just pushing the workload on the high performers while I'll allow others to underperform for the simple fact that either I'm not making the time or I don't have the behavioral capacity to address that by having these one-to-one type conversations. So that is, very interesting. Shifting away from that, the part of the engagement is also, catering to the individual intrinsic values or needs. So, Greg, on your perspective in NYPD, and I think you mentioned a little bit about, especially in the Detective Bureau, if you were the one, handing out the cases, how would you go about doing that to make sure that you have the interesting cases equally distributed to your personnel, or was it more or less a bidding process? How would that go, and what would that, how would that work on engagement levels of the team itself?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think the word complacency comes into, and it's complacency on the supervisors or the managers, because you can get very used to knowing that when a case, when something comes into the office and it comes from a priority client, like let's say the chief downtown or somebody, gets some intel on something and it comes directly from, inspector or a chief or somebody like that. And they say, can you guys look into this and let me know, those are the things you kind of get complacent and you say, oh, I'm going to give this to detective so-and-so because I know they're going to be the one that really digs into this and, I'll get my best result. But, sometimes you're doing others a disservice by not giving them a challenging, assignment, because as a supervisor or manager, you know it's going to be easier for you. So I think sometimes we had to sit back and, when I say we, it's me and, other supervisors in our office who had to kind of talk about like, well, why don't we, let's give so-and-so a chance on this. And then that just means a little bit more, we have to be a little more on it as supervisors to ensure that the product, which is, same between, the police department and in the private world, you still have to produce a product. People are still looking for results. And so, you have to make those choices. Now, sometimes things are just too high profile and you have to really rely on some of those people that are your stars. But I think you can kind of get pigeonholed in some of those people. And like going back to some of your content that I watched in the videos, Walter, on the website, that, a lot of it comes down to also getting to know your individual person, their story, and their background, their family structure and things like that. It's realistic to say, well, I know this person this detective has a sick relative and they might not be able to give us 110%, or this person has vacation coming up for 2 weeks. I mean, even right down to that kind of stuff, you got to make those evaluations. So you got to, like you said, you got to get to know your people. But I think you can get a little complacent, and you got to challenge yourself as a supervisor, as a manager, to, maybe give that harder assignment to somebody, knowing it's going to be a little bit, more work for you, but that's fine. That's what we signed up for.
It's interesting, right? So I refer to it as intrinsic values, right? As a leader, it's our responsibility to understand what makes somebody else tick, and then be able to cater to that, because the more we cater to that, and it might be somebody who just wants to be challenged, or somebody wants to hear, just hear me or develop me. It doesn't make a difference what it is, but it's unique to the person. It's our responsibility. So let's shift that conversation, and instead of focusing on the employee, focus on you as the leader. Did you receive enough guidance from your leaders or education on the importance of employee engagement? And James, question for you too, as you did, A3 problem solving with the nursing staff, what was the role of the education and development of the leader to be able to have these types of conversations?
Well, I think a good deal of it was, again, a lot of what you said there, Greg, in balancing the objectivity and the subjectivity of the people that you're working with, and what are the goals of the work at hand, as well as the personalities of the people and the capabilities, and developing capabilities, and helping the leadership to ensure that they're identifying that the correct skills were available, and for the jobs that we were asking the people to do. So that was a big part of it, of making sure that the leadership understood what they were asking their staff to do, and when and how, and were they really equipped to do it.
Yeah, so did you identify a gap in the development of leaders? And I think that's, I've mentioned this before, one of the reasons why I started at the Dutch Mentor is that a lot of technical skilled people, like police officers, like nurses, like doctors, who are phenomenally good at what they did in their original jobs, are promoted into leadership roles, but then kind of sort of fall flat because they don't have the skills, knowledge, and abilities to be an effective leader. The question is, of course, does the organization recognize it, and are they giving enough support and development to their leaders? So, Greg, back to you. Interesting that your role is a civil service role, and of course you have to go to an exam process in order to qualify for promotion up to sergeant or lieutenant or captain or chief. In those exams, was there any focus on leadership development, especially around the soft side, right, the empathy, the EQ portion of leadership, where engagement often is housed?
Well, let's see. So the last time I took a civil service test was about 18 years ago. I've been a sergeant for 17 years when I retired. Well, the test is one thing. The test is really based on just your procedure guide and knowing procedure step by step. But they do, once you get prepared to be promoted, you do go to like a supervisor class. They call it BMOC. And it's we're for 4 or 5, 6 weeks, depending on what's happening in the department. You do get lectures come in, you have coursework and things like that. And they'll have other experienced supervisors come in and lecture. There's some written work. Psychologists come in and speak. They talk about the art of supervision, which, it's quite a bit different than being, when I was just a patrol officer. It's a very different world. Going from sergeant to lieutenant and up the ranks, you're kind of more used to it. But from PO to sergeant, it was difficult. It was a lot to learn and a lot to get comfortable with as a supervisor. So as far as, you know, the training within the police department is done on a massive scale. It's not very individualized at all. So a lot of what you do, I think, you know, unfortunately, a lot of it is just street learning. It's really just over time, you end up having to, you know, experience different things out in the street, or a lot of trial by fire, and you know, which I think it does a little disservice. But I'm not sure the police department could really handle, you know, the thousands of people that they promote in a year, or not, I shouldn't say thousands in a year, but the thousands of people that get promoted over a period of time, and be able to train them with a lot of like the art of supervision is kind of the way I put it. So it's difficult. It's hard to say where, you know, a lot of my comfort level supervisors just came over time, and I'm not sure, you know, maybe smaller organizations, smaller departments, or smaller corporations or businesses can probably provide more individualized, you know, supervisory training like that.
Yeah, I think that, listen, some people are natural born leaders and they get it, right? And again, that's a small group of early adopters and champions who will go out and find the information themselves. You know, part of coaching for success is, and that's really what I have identified as the gap, is that when people get promoted, even if you take a class or 2 or 3, 90% of that information you receive in the class is probably long forgotten by the time you hit the road. It is what you do after that. And some people will continue to be a student of life and leadership, but many others, and I would say almost the vast majority of that, do not. And they end up getting some street smarts. But often it is harsher, they're more directive, they're less empathetic, and don't become not necessarily the most effective leaders, and certainly not in a servant manner. Yeah, so that is, I think it's an opportunity, and I see the difficulties with organizations like New York City Health and Hospital or NYPD, where you are, you know, on restricted funds, where the pockets are not so deep. So a way around that is to have a mentor program, right? So as you get promoted into a supervisory role, that you have somebody, you're connected to somebody who has been in the role for quite some time, who can give you that one-to-one guidance as you continue to build out your leadership skills. Any experience with that at NYPD? And James, any insight on that from your part?
Okay, I'll go. So the NYPD is as a supervisor, when you get first promoted, you really just go back to a precinct, and you're really put right out into the street as a patrol supervisor, right out there in the car, answering radio runs, monitoring your sector cars. And in that sense, there really isn't a lot of mentoring. You might have a few experienced supervisors that may help you out a little bit, but you're really kind of thrown to the wolves. You really are. Now, when I went to the detective bureau, it was a different situation. It's obviously slower work. You're in an office and you're doing more investigative work where you can spend more time. And you do tend to have closer relationships with your lieutenant or your captain or your inspector, whoever's in charge. And you know, where they can come into your office and say, Greg, you know, XYZ, whatever. And you can say, all right, I'll look into that. And you can kind of develop, you know, over a little time, you kind of feel what's expected of you and what they expect you to then pass on to your troops. So it's kind of twofold in the NYPD, but really initially there's not a lot of mentoring or anything like that.
Yeah, so that speaks to the gap, and hopefully we'll find ways to close that gap. I think that too much talent is lost in the process by not developing the people who are leading other people, and it is certainly an art and a skill that can be developed. Again, we hope through these roundtable discussions we can identify that, and then you know, at the DutchMentor.com, that we provide you know, some ability to close that gap. I think that the membership portion of it, as we continue to build that out, having these reflective communications, daily reminders, and weekly lectures, that people have an opportunity to build upon the skills, knowledge, and abilities to make it easier on them. And as they become better and more effective leaders, and then of course those who they lead will be the beneficiaries of that. That leads to greater engagement. Greater engagement leads to productivity increases, revenue, or cost reductions. And cost reduction in the world of public health or public you know, safety is overtime reduction, right? People become better at what they do, becoming more conscious, and that also leads to better work-life balance, which on the end of the day we need to preserve, right? It is really, really important. That's another key part of engagement is to have mental wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness, and relationship wellness. So James and Greg, any parting words before we end today's roundtable?
Well, I will say that I think that one thing I learned is that there is a similarity between the two professions or areas of expertise that we were talking about today, in that there's a very low tolerance for error and a very high need or demand for excellence in work from top to bottom. And recognizing that, I think, is an important part of leadership and engagement all across the board, both up and down and laterally.
Yeah, I think that we need to, and I would add to that the companies need to come to the realization to get that everyday excellence. There needs to be an investment in time and effort that equals that in order to get the output they desire. It's not going to happen by chance. Greg, any parting words on your?
Well, I guess I just want to say thank you, Walter, for inviting me into this world. Again, like I said, I just retired about 10 months ago, so this is all very brand new for me, but I'm very looking forward to this new stage of life. And like James said, there are some, when I sit back and think about it, I thought it was two very different worlds, but they're very not. It's the same thing, producing a good product, being accountable to your supervisors and people that, can control you or have, you have your fate in their hand, and you have to please them and have to make sure you're producing. Because anybody can be moved around. I had a very great end of my career. I was in a couple great spots, had great people I worked for, great detectives that worked for me. But if you don't produce and you don't keep things going, you're just another number sometimes. So so I guess and that's kind of similar to everywhere you work, public or private. Anything can change. So this is going to be a very interesting journey here, and I appreciate Walter giving me a chance to impart some of my experience and knowledge on people.
Yeah, again, we can all learn from each other, right? And I don't really care where anybody comes from, which manufacturing or healthcare or police. Leading people is still leading people, right? These are the hearts and souls of the workforce. And if we take care of them, they will take care of us. So with that said, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining today, and we'll continue the dialogue next Thursday at 11 o'clock. And I hope folks will join us and help share their experiences with the greater team. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.